Greetings, my dear friends. I, Commander Chakrapani or Chax, have the greatest of pleasure to welcome Rohan Advani, an expert in Middle East affairs. He is doing his PhD in sociology from UCLA and is an international acclaimed expert as far as geopolitics, especially of the Middle East, is concerned. Rohan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and hello to your audience.
Right. So, Rohan, Middle East is one area, whether you call it Middle East, you call it Persian Gulf, it is one area where India has phenomenal geopolitical, historical, cultural, economic links. Right from times immemorial, we have had this connect with the Middle East. Right. If you look at the Middle East per se, it is the crossroads between Asia, Europe, and Africa. No wonder almost everybody is focusing on Middle East and has been focusing like that for quite a while. The fortunes of Middle East changed the more you had the discovery of oil. Oil changed everything out here. And then you had Henry Kissinger, who went ahead with the petrodollar scheme of his, everything denominated in dollars, and dollar became the international currency of worth or value or whatever you want to call it. And the basis of that was, of course, the petrodollar, the oil. Almost all transactions, including today, 80% of all transactions in oil are done by dollar. It has come down from virtually 100%, but 80 nonetheless. US has always been a dominant power here. US did try under Obama to refocus itself to the Asia-Pac or Indo-Pacific, but it had to come back with a lot of vigor, especially with Iran getting into the picture and trying to do more. But why am I telling all this? Rohan, why don't you introduce the Middle East to all of us?
Sure. Again, thank you for having me, and hello to everyone. So, as you said, the Middle East, even though the term the Middle East is actually somewhat recent, it's really a 20th century phenomenon. The region itself, the geographic Southwest Asia, has obviously been such an important part of world history, and especially vis-a-vis India, right? As we said, the Indian Ocean trade that has been going on for so long, the fact that parts of the contemporary Persian Gulf, the oil-rich Persian Gulf states, were actually part of the British Raj, right? Sometimes forgotten in our history. It's obviously of a critical importance to India, but even globally, if we talk about the US, the Middle East has obviously always been important. It was an important battleground in the Cold War. It's been important in terms of oil and in terms of, exerting geopolitical influence writ large. And in recent decades, in the post-Cold War period, especially as you mentioned under Obama, successive US administrations have always tried to pivot to Asia, right? And actually try to reduce their exposure to the Middle East. But it always seems that they get stuck, and they always seem to always pivot back to the Middle East. So I think I want to get into both the continuities and change, because I think that currently the Middle East is going through a really rapidly changing period in its history. Alliances are breaking down, new ones are forming. The future is still unclear. The old order has clearly fallen away, but a new one hasn't fully risen yet either. And so in this interregnum, I think it's important to try to get into some of these more recent developments.
Right. Among the most recent developments, the path-breaking has been Gaza, Palestine. Not that it is new, it has been there for a long time. However, of late, especially after Hamas attacked Israel a couple of years back, and that was a dastardly terrorist act, which is, well, virtually no parallel, if you will. Since then, Gaza has become the epicenter in many ways as far as terrorism is concerned, other than Pakistan. Now, if Gaza was a problem, Palestine was a problem, not many people, really speaking, understand the Palestinian issue so well. And I'm sure you have great insights to it. But however, let me try and focus a couple of things out here. Where will, in case you do have a two-state solution, what will be Palestine? Will it be where we know as it is called the Palestine? Is it going to be the West Bank? Is it going to be some parts of Gaza? Or will it be something dramatically different in Syria? Maybe even the Sinai Peninsula? What is your opinion, and where does the Abrahamic Accords, which became another epoch turning event, if you will, where do they take us?
Yeah. So that's great. So I think if we start with the Abraham Accords, this was the Abraham Accords, I would actually say, was slightly less about Palestine, and it was more about Israel and the Gulf. The Gulf states had always wanted to normalize with Israel. Some have seen it as a kind of anti-Iran pact, but the Gulf states have also changed their relationship with Iran. Actually, it's more about regional integration, technological development, and a kind of alliance that's broadly under a U.S. security umbrella. The Emiratis, the Bahrainis, for example, normalized ties with Israel, whereas Saudi Arabia held out. But that all came to a crash on October 7th, as you mentioned. And now Saudi Arabia has said that they will not normalize ties with Israel until Israel commits to a two-state solution and a Palestinian state, which Israel increasingly looks like it is not interested in and does not want to do. So I think we're in this weird period where there is actually some crucial international support for a two-state solution, but it seems that the domestic political coalitions are in no way ready to make this happen, both in Israel and Palestine. And of course, Israel's main backer in the United States. So what would a Palestinian state look like? I am unfortunately a bit pessimistic about the future of that. I think Gaza has basically been destroyed. It's effectively uninhabitable for most of the Strip. And in the West Bank, which is supposed to be the heart of the Palestinian Authority, I visited 2 years ago, or 3 years ago actually, and it is completely full of settlements, right? It is more like thought of as a kind of like a Swiss cheese, right? It's full of small Palestinian towns, Israeli settlements, and I think it's heading towards more of a situation of kind of this like South African Bantustans, where you have Palestinian cities that are fully populated by Palestinians, but the surroundings are basically controlled by either the Israeli military or Israeli settlers. And in Israel, the right-wing coalition that's in power basically it's effectively, they don't want to, and it's also politically suicidal for them to advocate for a Palestinian state. So it's effectively off the table. So without those, I really don't see how this happens. So that's what I would say on the future of Gaza and the West Bank. Whether it would happen in the Sinai or Syria, again, I'm skeptical. The history of Arab states is that they've never wanted to absorb the quote-unquote Palestinian refugee problem. They don't feel that they should be responsible for hosting a Palestinian refugee problem for two reasons. One, it can be a domestic issue, but secondly, there's an argument that if they take in those refugees, they are in some ways doing Israel's work for them, right? They're in some ways taking the population so that Israel can take the territory. So I think for the Egyptian government and for the Syrian government, these would be extremely difficult things to do politically as well.
Rohan, there used to be a Ralph Peters map which came out in 2006, 2007, which effectively showed a redrawn boundaries of all of Middle East, Persian Gulf, right up to Pakistan.
Hmm.
In that, if you notice, there was no Palestinian state at all. There was Syria, which was divided between the Kurds and the others. There was Iraq, which was divided like that. And you had Pakistan divided into three parts. A greater Afghanistan taking over the the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa area, a Balochistan, if you will, and Pakistan shriveled to just the Punjab area. What is your opinion? Is the future something like the Ralph Peters map? Because in many ways, if you see, Syria has not got full control over the Kurd area at all. In fact, Syria, Turkey are both trying to fight that part out. Kurds are by and large independent. And the US is quite happy to let them be like that. That area has also got Iraqi areas. Well, Iran is also not too happy, but they don't have too many choices. And all said and done, Iran is the major elephant in this room. Nobody talks of Iran directly, but it has been Iran which has been running in many ways the geopolitics of this region with its 3H, the Hamas, the Houthi, and the Hezbollah.
Mhm.
What is your opinion? Does it really mean we will have no Palestinian state at all and back to the Ralph Peter map? Or will there be a compromise?
It's a great question. I think so. Some Western governments have obviously recognized a Palestinian state now recently. This is obviously a symbolic move, right? It doesn't change the facts on the ground. I think that this will continue to be a protracted issue because the issue of Palestine is obviously resonant in many countries. So it's probably going to be impossible to just completely ignore. And of course, Palestinians still exist, right? And they're not going to go anywhere. So I think if we bracket out Palestine, let me talk about the other places. Especially since 9/11, after the war on terror, etc., there was always this spate of new map making, and there was this often diagnosis that everything that is wrong in the Middle East is because the British drew the lines in the arbitrary places and they divided up the region. They should have divided it up by sect, but they didn't. I actually want to push back on this narrative a bit. It's less about where the lines were drawn and more about what is the nature of political belonging and rights. Because
Right.
I actually think that in many cases, for example, if we take the issue of the Kurds, some people said, oh, you know what? It should actually be this unified Kurd area and we would split Syria into three, etc., right? There was always this obsession with remaking the map. But that just, to me, that ignores basic politics. There is vehement disagreement between Syrian Kurds and Iraqi Kurds. There's vehement disagreement between different factions within them, right? Sometimes there is more cooperation between Syrian Kurds and other groups in Syria than there are between Syrian Kurds and Iraqi Kurds. So it's really about reaching political settlements that provide rights to people, right? And that are stable, right? It's basically about reaching political compromise and settlement. And in some places this has happened, and in many places this hasn't. So I think really that's often a better way to think about the Middle East rather than only seeing it through the lens of sect or ethnicity, which is of course important. I don't want to diminish that, but it's not the only way in which the region functions.
Ron, all said and done, America, by that I mean the US, has always been a major player, in fact, the most powerful, the most influential player in this part of the world. Today, America has its influence right from the Mediterranean all the way into Pakistan. This region is bang center of it. In between, America withdrew, but it came back in a big way, especially when it started seeing the Chinese influence growing. Then, of course, happened the war with Iran and all that. and America is back with full force here. What is the American view of this area? Where does America see itself maybe 5 years from now and this region 5 years from now?
It's a great question. I don't want to look into the crystal ball, so it's hard for me to say what's going to happen in 5 years, especially with this sort of administration. But I think it's worth parsing out some of the trends. So Trump 2.0, let's say, kind of campaigned on a quasi anti-war campaign, right? It was like, we need to get out of the Middle East. We need to not be supporting these disastrous wars that cost us a lot of money, and we get nothing in return. And in many ways, that was a view that a lot of Americans sympathized with, I think. It was also paired with a sort of neo-Reaganite vision of peace through strength, right? So what does that actually mean, though, in practice? I think these are some a few trends that I've noticed. One is that the U.S. is strongly supporting GCC countries, and they are doing lots of military deals, economic deals, and they have a sort of transactional mode of politics that works with one another between the Trump family and ruling elites in the Gulf. The second thing is there has been this move under both. It started in Trump 1, but it also really accelerated in Trump 2, which is to reduce the traditional institutional powers, American institutions like the State Department and USAID, and even senior military figures, and remove their influence and instead replace them with trusted advisors. So we see figures like Masad Boulos, who is his son is married to Trump's daughter, Jared Kushner's Trump's son-in-law, Steve Witkoff, a fellow real estate deal, Tom Barak, who is also from the real estate industry. They have been sent in to kind of do deals, whether in Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Palestine, Egypt, the Gulf, the Horn of Africa even. And I think Trump sort of trusts this setup rather than relying on the traditional bureaucratic institutions that have been the mainstay of American power in the region. And then the last one is, of course, what is a continuity is this campaign of maximum pressure on Iran. It started in Trump 1, and it's obviously took place in Trump 2.0 when the US, along with Israeli support, of course, bombed Iran. So these are some of the trends that I see in terms of how the US looks at the region. They want a return on their investment. They don't want to be stuck there. They want to be powerful, but they want to exert power through more personalistic mechanisms rather than traditional bureaucratic institutions, along with the show of a strong military force.
It's interesting you talk about real estate and the people connected with real estate in corridors of power. There is a very growing current situation which a lot of people talk about is Gaza will be converted into a Rivera of sorts, real estate deals by the dozen and etc. And therefore the Palestinians from Gaza will all move into Syria or Sinai or wherever else. That's one thought process. The other, if you will, you spoke about Iran and the fact that Iranian nuclear areas were bombed out of the world, if you will, by the US very recently. That has not stopped Iran, really speaking, from either continuing with its enrichment, nor has it stopped Saudi Arabia from pursuing a nuclear option. From getting ahead and US seemingly approving or agreeing to set up a nuclear power plant for Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia signing a deal with Pakistan, the mutual defense deal, which in India is considered in some form Saudi Arabia buying itself a nuclear umbrella of Pakistan for all that is worth. Do you really think this nuclear option is moving forward? And if it is, do you think Iranian nuclear option can be totally removed from the thinking process?
That's a great question. I think it's one that Iranian defense analysts, foreign policy makers, and the government are really thinking about as well. I think that there's a thinking in Iran that effectively the three H's, as you said, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, what's often referred to as proxies, right? Basically Iranian aligned groups, that effectively that strategy was not very effective. And that the Israelis basically took out two of these three pillars in a very short amount of time, right? With the Houthis, some people even say that actually the amount of control that they have, that the Iranians have over the Houthis, is actually not even, it's not to the same level as Hezbollah, for example. So I think Iranians have felt, as all defense do, right? You can interpret certain things as offensive and defensive. I think they often are slippery distinctions. So, but let's say from their perspective, they viewed these proxies as ways of exerting Iranian power, but also defending Iranian interests. I think from their perspective, they felt like, look, this hasn't really worked that well. The thing that actually has probably protected us in some ways is the threat of nuclear enrichment, right? So I think that will never be off the table for Iranians, because from their perspective, why would they? Right?
Right.
They might feel that if they get rid of it, they'll be bombed and they'll be the next to be invaded, right? And I would suggest that they have some evidence for that sort of thinking. That obviously complicates the issue for Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia does not want Iran to have nuclear weapons. And if Iran has nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia would want nuclear weapons too. I think everyone wants to avoid a situation in which both those countries get nuclear weapons. But of course, as we know, there are unintended consequences. And these, the way in which arms races work, you get a situation in which no one actually wanted in the beginning. So, I wouldn't remove that option. It's definitely a possibility, right? It's not out of the question. So Saudi Arabia might be hedging, right? It's probably hedging. It doesn't want to go full into a nuclear program that would annoy its, or really anger its larger allies. But I think it would be wanting to see what's going on. The final thing I will just quickly say about nuclear energy, of course, the distinction of going from nuclear energy to nuclear weapons can be a little bit slippery, but there are genuine reasons for wanting a civilian nuclear energy program, especially with Saudi Arabia being very committed to a national domestic developmental agenda, which would, with the building of data centers or industry that requires more energy. And obviously, nuclear power would be an important element of that.
That gives a very interesting segue, Rohan, into the IMEC, or the India Middle East Economic Corridor. Essentially an economy, but energy corridor. Today, it would be more in terms of oil and gas being transported to the hungry markets of Europe, but it also transports the next generation of an energy, which is clean energy, solar, the green hydrogen, maybe even the brown hydrogen, all of that. Plus, it is a connection between India, a huge market, a big manufacturing base, to the areas where manufacturing, even if you had the ability, you don't have the people, which is Europe. An area which is hungry for energy, which is again Europe. An area which is going to come up in a big way, which is Africa. All of it through the IMEC. And then don't forget, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, all of them know oil is not going to last forever. They have already started hedging their bets by looking at alternative means of energy, and can they make money from transshipment itself. And that again brings us back to IMEC. If IMEC has to succeed, the Abrahamic Accords have to succeed. If Abrahamic Accords have to succeed, then they have to get even more deeper and more acceptable across a wider range of countries. The latest in this list has been Kazakhstan, which says that, okay, we will sign the Abrahamic Accord, and probably many other of the Central Asian republics would sign it. In some form, this accord would never have happened if Saudi Arabia had not given tacit approval. Where do you see IMEC leading all of us into? And finally, Gaza can never be out of this, because the port which will be used is Haifa, which is right there. And if Gaza has to be sorted out, the Gaza peace plan envisages in some form 25,000 troops from Pakistan to make or maintain or manage peace in this area. Somehow be the in between Israel and the Hamas. Within Pakistan, this is an unacceptable situation. But for US, it seems to be an option. Where do you see all of this leading?
Yeah, this is a great question, and you know, yourself and your audience will be in some ways much more well versed in this from an Indian perspective than myself. But the way I see it, at least IMEC, you know, in some ways obviously has its origins as a kind of anti-Belt and Road initiative, right? A way to counter Chinese Belt and Road, the Chinese Belt and Road initiative. One thing that I just want to clarify for everyone that's sometimes worth saying is that the Belt and Road and the IMEC are not single pieces of infrastructure, right? There's no one thing called the BRI. There's no one thing called the IMEC. These are often arrangements to allow for a series of negotiated settlements, infrastructure deals that are sometimes highly integrated and sometimes actually somewhat loosely integrated. With that said, IMEC, there was a lot of talk about it when it came out, obviously. I've been hearing about it a lot less recently. I don't know what the discourse in India is about IMEC, so I'd be curious to learn from you. But the way I see it, I think you put it brilliantly, is that to me, there is a lot of buy-in from the Gulf. They're very bullish on India. They want to be more connected to India. India is a growing market. They see that as both an energy importer and also a market to, for example, set up data centers here, which could provide compute to Indian software companies, right? In some ways, there's a hidden story of India coming, or the Gulf coming back into the Indian orbit after 200 years. But as you said, the main sticking point is Israel-Palestine. Unless that is resolved, I don't see how this proceeds, especially because it requires both Israeli and Jordanian support. And that might also require neighboring countries, where in Jordan, you know, you have to remember that in Jordan, the capital of Amman, the majority of Jordanians are of Palestinian origin. It's a highly, highly, highly unpopular, politically unpopular idea to basically just give up on a commitment to a Palestinian state, right? And so for the Jordanian, even if the Jordanian royal family wanted to do this, politically, it's very difficult for them to do it, right? It's difficult for Israel to accept unless all of this is sorted out. So I agree with you that unless a negotiated settlement is there, I don't see IMEC taking off in that region, at least. Then that comes to the question of the Abraham Accords, right? And you mentioned Central Asian countries joining. And I actually then think that that's further evidence of what the Abraham Accords really are about. Kazakhstan joined the Abraham Accords, and it already has relations with Israel. It normalized relations with Israel in 1992. So it actually shows you this is much more about a sort of quasi-US-Israeli alliance, especially on issues of the economy, on tech, a way for Kazakhstan to sort of gain closer ties with the Trump administration and move away from the Russians a little bit, to get Emirati companies to invest in data centers in Kazakhstan, right? Kazakhstan wants to become more highly integrated into the global economy, and the Abraham Accords is actually a way to do that. It's really then the issue of Palestine is actually further relegated, right? So
Right.
so that's where what started off as a highly basically like, look, this is the new Oslo, whatever, that gets erased, and really what stays is the economic, the tech, the military alliances, and less so of the the real pressing problems that are happening in Israel Palestine.
Right. So in many ways, Rohan, you're telling us that somehow or the other, by hook or by crook, the Palestinian issue will continue to get relegated further and further away, and focus shifting to other areas which are greater convergence, especially between the US, Israel, and the larger Western world, if you will.
I would say I would agree, and I would just say with one caveat. From their perspective, the Palestinian issue is being relegated. But as we know from history, the Palestinian issue will always pop up again and again and again. So unless we have a political settlement, we can pretend that this issue will go away, but it ultimately won't, in my opinion. And then we'll have to deal with the fallout in whatever way happens.
Right. So, Rohan, many, many thanks. You have simplified the very, very complex Middle East region, or the Persian Gulf region, a region which is known for so many complexities, and people just can't live together with each other. It doesn't matter which brand of Islam they follow. For India, this region is very important. Energy security, almost 50% of our energy needs come from here. Supply chain, just think of the two major choke points as far as maritime trade is concerned. You will remember the Suez Canal and the Straits of Hormuz. Bulk of India's trade happens from here. Don't forget, India maintains a 24/7, 365 days a year patrol of the Red Sea. And in recent past, it has been Indian Navy which has been ensuring the Houthis cannot really show as much muscle as they could. The piracy is more or less been sorted out because of the Indian Navy. We have huge trade requirements from here. Don't forget, $161 billion of trade happened between India and the GCC countries alone. We're not talking about the other countries. UAE itself was at 83 billion. It is the third largest trading partner for India. The economic corridors, the IMEC, the INSTC, which is through Iran into the Central Asian republics and thereafter into Russia, are also a part of this. Phenomenal investments. Just in the year 2020, between 2020 and 2025, UAE alone has invested $22 billion in India. We have a huge diaspora here. Our diaspora is 66% of all Indian diaspora is in the GCC countries. They account for 38% of total remittances, upwards of $45 billion in the year 2024 alone. UAE accounts for over half of this. This, of course, has declined from about 47% in 2015, 2016, but it is there nonetheless. Security-wise, strategy-wise, important. No wonder the I2U2 happened. No wonder the IMEC is happening. No wonder we have great defense ties with here. Just think of it. PM has been honored with the top civilian awards by virtually every country here. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, Kuwait, Palestine, Qatar, name it. He's been honored there. No wonder this is of great importance as far as India is concerned. Rohan, you definitely lit up many, many lamps in our areas which were totally dark as far as this area is concerned. Thank you very much. As they say in India, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Thank you.